right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Quentin Ring. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I wanted to welcome you to an evening of readings with our friends from What Books Press and their imprint, Giant Claw. We are celebrating new books tonight from two of our favorite authors, Amy Uyematsu and Chuck Rosenthal. We'll get to the program in just a moment, but before we get started, I wanted to say a few words about Beyond Baroque. First, I'd like to acknowledge Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these people through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their land. And as an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting Indigenous writers and communities. As many of you know, Beyond Baroque is a literary space in Venice, California, and we are dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language through cultivating new writing, presenting contemporary literature and art, and building a diverse literary community. As of last month, we are now open for regular in-person readings, so please do swing by for some of those. We have some great programs coming up. Tomorrow, we have Anfitriones, program featuring 6 Latinx poets who also happen to be literary curators. That will feature reading as well as a discussion on curation, community building, and the Los Angeles literary scene. On Saturday, we're hosting the launch for Christopher Soto's powerful new book, Diaries of a Terrorist. The book is very much focused on the abolition of the police. And there's a stellar lineup to support that program, including Jackie Wong, Vanessa Angelica Villarreal, Miriam Gerba, Joshua Jennifer Espinoza, and quite a few others. And then next week, we also have a discussion between writers and artists that are part of our current art exhibition in the Mike Kelly Gallery here at Beyond Baroque 7x7 LA. That's going to be a really great reading and discussion on sort of the creative collaborative process between visual artists and writers. And finally, we're hosting a poetry film festival on April 30th. Stay tuned for details on that. Additionally, we're also very much continuing with virtual readings. Next Thursday, we have Poets Translate Poets, which features translation between Spanish and English and focuses on the Latin American avant-garde. That's going to be a great program with Jerry Rothenberg, Anthony Seidman, Monica de la Torres, Roberto Tejada, Teddy Lopez Mills. So do come back virtually for that. We're incredibly thrilled to be open again, but it's also been incredibly expensive to get ourselves up and running after 2 years being closed, rebuilding the space, rebuilding our organizations. In other words, we're very much in need of your help to help us do what we do, to program readings, workshops, art exhibits, to rebuild the space. So please do consider making a donation to us as part of this program. It's a great help to everything that we do. You'll find a link to our donation page in the chat. But above all, I wanted to say, please do purchase our authors' books. Chuck is a superb writer, and I think you'll just love his new book, Let's Face the Music and Dance. And Amy, I'm just really, really happy to have Amy read with us tonight. She's a brilliant poet, a wonderful human being who has given so much to poetry, to LA literature, and to Beyond Baroque as well. And I think you'll really enjoy her new book, That Blue Trickster Time. I'm really excited to hear her read from it. So if you want their books, you can find the link to them in the chat. We hope to have copies for them in our bookstore as well soon. So I don't want to say too much more about the program because fortunately we have Karen Kevorkian here to introduce the reader. Karen's part of the What Books Collective. She's also a member of Beyond Baroque's Board of Trustees. She's herself a wonderful, wonderful poet. And she's here to tell you a little bit more about these great writers. So Karen, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Quentin. I'm so happy to be introducing Amy and Chuck tonight. Their new books are coming out this spring. Amy's book is published by What Books Press, now in its 13th year of publication. Testimony to the vitality of small presses that are the historic and contemporary cornerstones of literary publishing. What Books is an artist collective, and soon it will have published 50 books of poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and a few art books. Chuck's title appears under a recent imprint of What Books, Giant Claw Press. Like Amy, Chuck is known pretty well to Beyond Baroque audiences. With Gail Wronski, he is one of the co-founders of What Books Press, which really wouldn't exist without him. So thank you, Chuck.
Welcome.
We also want to thank Beyond Baroque for supporting us all this time, particularly Quentin Ring, and most recently in programming, Jimmy Vega and Yvonne Salinas. So I hope you all will come see us all at Beyond Baroque in person very soon. I'm going to introduce Chuck first, and then after he reads, I will give an introduction for Amy. Chuck is an amazingly prolific writer of novels and nonfiction, and 2 books of Dada poetry in collaboration with Gail Wronski. This is his 19th published book and his 15th novel, although sometimes it's a matter of perspective, separating nonfiction from fiction in Chuck's books. He is, by the way, retiring this spring from 36 years of teaching fiction and narrative theory at Loyola Marymount. So hooray for Chuck. I'm sure we'll have a lot more books from him.
Live.
If I were going to hair split, I would add a category of autofiction to the what book list of genres. In some of Chuck's books, he makes use of thinly and not so thinly disguised personal anecdote and characters. But in this new novel, the fictional space feels not just like personal narrative. It enlarges the territory of the personal, surveying the literary bedrock of the narrator's motivation and experience. And because the narrator is a seeker of meaning, he includes 20th century philosophical movements as part of his survey. Another bonus in the book is, in this very capacious book, is the shift into a novel about the Civil War, which the narrator ultimately says he can't complete because he can't abide the moral repugnance of slavery. It's an immense literary landscape, and the voice is immense, urgent yet distanced, masterfully balanced between awareness of what was desired, but understanding the ambiguities of desire obtained. So please welcome Chuck Rosenthal.
And I'm up. Thanks so much, Karen, and thanks so much for What Books and Beyond Baroque, to Quentin and Yvonne and Jimmy Vegas, who've been a great help. I'm going to kind of thank you all for being here. Those of you who are here, there's a lot of people here, and that's wonderful. There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance. Little preface. Let's Face the Music and Dance combines several narrative forms. The first is a third-person contemporary literary novel following the lives of 2 characters, a novelist, Pat, and a poet, Carla, and that third-person narrator is technically a first-person omniscient narrator. There are lots of narrators in this book. That story folds around a first-person philosophical essay by the novel's narrator on the ontology of desire. Amid those narrative lines emerges an historical novel by Path, set in New Orleans and Vicksburg leading up to Grant's 1863 siege, a novel that borrows freely from the film Casablanca. And I think that'll become pretty obvious too as it unfolds. A little bit I read of it unfolds. This is the first few pages of Let's Face the Music and Dance. The first chapter, In Exile, was originally the title of the book. Come all ye faithless. Path was living on the edge of something. What? Not so many nights ago, he sat across a round glass table from his lover, Carla, whom he'd known and loved for over a half of his life, now a relatively long 66 years and ticking. She was 6 years younger. A shaded ceiling light glowed over them. There was a dog, Nadine, 12 years old, diabetic, going blind, a big brown hound. She lay at Carla's feet, a noise outside, and she lifted her head. Her throat rumbled. She was yet on watch. She would never give up, not until she died. What would Path hold on to with that kind of intensity? The table was tall, a bar table, and they sat on stools made of Mexican leather and wood. The house around him, built on the side of a hill, was a summer cabin as early as 1923. Historical placement. In the last 2 years, the idols of their worlds, that's what it was, worlds, at least 2 of them, if not more, those idols began to die. William Gass, Larry Levis, David Bowie, Leonard Cohen, Galway Cannell, which is spelled with 2 L's. Unfortunately, I misspelled it. Adrian Rich, C.D. Wright, Gene Valentine. What did that say? It said, don't ask, just get in line. Nothing lay in front of Path but inevitability. 8 years ago, he contracted cancer, and he thought his future had been stripped. Then he didn't die, and the future fell in front of him again, blank as if he'd closed every door in and out, and nothing surrounded him but nothingness. His lover raised her glass of tonic on ice, a slice of lime. Only weeks ago, they'd stopped drinking liquor because it was killing her liver. He joined the bash of abstinence. He'd been drinking hard since he was 13. As someone said to him, that's a good long run. They touched tonics. She sipped. She said, I want a glass of wine. He said, I can taste the bourbon on the tip of my tongue. A couple of nihilists suffering to save their lives. He bought a bicycle. Once he'd been an athlete. It was hard to tell how good. Explaining would be complicated and narcissistic. He hated that about the arts, the amount of narcissism it took to survive. Now, with the ubiquitous internet, his computer screen was lambasted by poets and painters, photographs of kids and pets, lunches and dinners, breakfast, bees, birds, photographs of paintings, dogs, cats, and horses, unabashed selfies, photographs of photographs, flattening the flat world flatter, flat as a pancake, fat, self-flattery, even flatter than flat. What's wrong with that? That's what's wrong. Lives streamed out on Instagram, Twitter, Tweeter, fee, fi, fo, you wish. It was only 2017. Kobe Bryant wasn't dead yet. We had yet to fall to the COVID plague. And yet, we're here to simplify. Complicated task enough. The new bike had 7 speeds. In 1975, he bought a 10-speed Sakai. It was light as a feather. He rode it everywhere, wherever he lived. Even in winter, if the pavement was free of snow, he rode. Finally, he bought a motorcycle, then a bigger one. It was 1982. He drove the bike from Davis up the California coast, Oregon, Washington. In the wooded forests of Washington, it rained and rained. You must brake evenly in the rain, front and back. In Port Angeles, he ferried to Victoria Island, drove about, then ferried to Vancouver. He crossed Canada. Something should have happened then. Maybe something did. All that time alone, $300 in a sleeping bag, each night a fire and a bottle of cheap Yugoslav red wine. He camped, waiting for the devil. Turned out to be a good way to avoid the devil. But the devil doesn't tell you, here I am. Once you slept with him, Path. You loved him. He bought you tea and oranges that came all the way from China. Steaks and booze. Look at your beautiful body, said the devil. You stared down. Is this what you want? Is this what you want? And the devil said, yes. He never liked the image of the black hole. He didn't like black holes. He didn't like holes. But this was a multiverse where things were disappearing, and he wanted to be in one of those things where things emerged, one of those places where things emerged, the debris of other realities exploding anew. But he wasn't even the god of his own imagination, and he wants to live a life that isn't about himself. Who am I? His lover said to him. Who are you? And he said, St. George, raise a sword against the dragon of my ambition. He remembered a summer evening in the backyard of his childhood home in a city spread on the shore of a great lake, where the nights were gray and the days were gray and everything was under a blue shadow. Dusk fell holy and leaden. His father had just come down an extension ladder that he scaled 20 feet into the limbs and leaves to gather Bartlett pears the size of your fist. Path stood below with a fielder's mitt, and as his father threw them down, the pears pushed through the leaves, whoosh, whoosh, and then smack into the mitt. As the light fell away, fireflies blinked in the air, gnats and mosquitoes thickened, and swallows swept in, diving through the clouds of insects, the shoulders of their wings ripping at the air as they descended. Ruda, Ruda, Ruda. His father, who fought in the Pacific, said, "Listen, that's the sound the Zeros made when they dove." Path was discovering gravity. Carla drew a bit of mild indica from the water pipe. After that, she lit a cigarette, a long Parliament. He fidgeted. He wasn't a smoker, not much of one, and pot exploded inside his head. "Have a drink," Carla said to him. "Don't suffer." He went to the refrigerator to get ice. In Australia, when he asked the hotel keeper for an ice bucket, the manager looked at him from where he was playing cards with another man and two women and said, "I forgot, an American." Americans used ice. In India, you couldn't find it. In Mexico, you couldn't drink it. The French drank wine. The British drank their booze stiff. He thought of those things every time he fetched his ice. Here in his kitchen, he puts 3 ice cubes in a small glass and pours a shot of rye. It tastes very good. Here, Path is determined to be neither narrator, author, nor character in this story. Charlie Parker called bebop a story. Each note could be a story. Parker hated the term bebop, but you didn't get to name your terms, name your names. Path is living in the center of a vacuum. Existentialism, an existential one, not in the terms of common parlance as you hear it nowadays, but in the Sartrean sense, meaning pouring out of him into meaninglessness, meaninglessness pouring back in. He said to Carla, "Everything I touch turns to nothing." She said, "Like Midas, only the opposite." He said, "Did I touch you once?" "Once," she said, "once you did." He wished she'd been more wistful, but she wasn't wistful. As she let parts of herself fall away, her heart rent like the temple curtain in Jerusalem the moment Christ expired. So that's kind of the main book that this is wrapped around. Path, after visiting Vicksburg, decides he can't really write a book set in the Civil War, but in the end, he finds a way to do it anyways. This takes place, this novel ends at the beginning of the siege, and its narrator is a ghost who dies during it. An omniscient one as well. This should go another 20 minutes, maybe less. Rick first met the woman in New Orleans, Anna Breton, blonde, very wavy hair to her shoulders. Her features were both soft and edged, framed delicately by her cheeks and jaw. She wore a full skirt, a blouse with puffed sleeves. Her laced boots had sturdy heels, and though she was not small, her head came only to the shoulder of the man she stood next to. He wore a civilian's hat, not a riding hat, and his skin was pale brown. She was still young, likely not yet 30, though she'd already lost a husband before the Yankees took New Orleans. He'd been running escaped slaves to Lafayette Free Island off Corpus Christi, then smuggling them north by ship along with cotton and rum. Dangerous stuff. As many blacks were recaptured as sold back at a profit as there were those who got away to Cuba or beyond. You had to burn that candle at both ends. Apparently his burned out. Rick met Anna after that. He'd come from New York City, where he'd made his money in booze, wholesale distribution, though his parents had wanted him to study law. But the Northeast, even New York, was too intimate and too cold. Whatever you did, you knew everybody else who did it. New Orleans was quaint and wild. He liked the culture and the sounds, the music of the free blacks. He liked the food. He met Shope, who's his best friend and a piano player, at his tavern. Rick is a tavern owner. The tavern is just west of Vicksburg, facing the Mississippi River. Shope is a free black who studied in Europe. He knew Chopin and Goethe, and his parents named him Schopenhauer. He met Shope there, and they became friends with him. Shope is also a fencer and a boxer. And Anna, who he met at a bookshop. On the other side of a shelf of books, hatless and uncommon thing, something a girl might do, not a woman. The sun splintered in shafts through a window blind and ran into the aisle where she stood, shining angelically on her wavy blonde hair. It was hair you'd want to put your hands in. She looked up. He saw only her clear forehead and pale crystal blue eyes. You're in F, he said. I hope it's not Madame Bovary. It's not, she said. What would it matter? Or maybe I did hope that. Do you recommend it? She spoke French, but it was continental French, not local. He'd been to college, Johns Hopkins. That's where he decided against studying law. That's where he decided against studying. So he knew some Latin, French too. With an accent like that, I'd expect you already read it, he said. I haven't been in France for a while, she said to him, but yes, I baited you. I've read it. I prefer Salambo. Unreadable, Rick said, too confusing and sadomasochistic. Experimental, you mean, she said. Too difficult? The geography of North Africa is authentic. He'd been there. The woman, the priestess, is strong. I'm not a fan of strength or weakness, he said. Have we reached our borders? This place has a cafe, you know. They sat outdoors and had coffee with chicory beignets. They added cognac to the second round. She'd left Paris with her parents after the madness of 1848, that revolution. Right? Not that they'd sympathize with the outcome. They would have preferred change, some form of socialism, not communism, and not how it ended up. The practical oligarchy, money still ruling, hands of government lifting cocktails to each other. Her family fled to Algiers. That's where she met her husband. She lifted her left hand and showed him her wedding ring. That shows it to Rick. He'd already noticed, of course. They tried to disrupt the slave trade in West Africa, ended up wanted by both the Dutch and the British. That's how her husband disappeared. She still wore the ring to ward off men. I see how well it works, he said. Like anything, she said, it works if I wanted to. She worked as an escort now. He sat back, looked around. No one watches me, she said. I'm my own boss. In every situation? In every situation. Well, he said, it really isn't my business. It's becoming your business, she said. She had a purse. She opened it and extracted a metal case, then opened that. It held small white sticks filled with tobacco. She offered him one. We don't have those here yet, he said. You will, she said. I roll these myself. And women smoke them? France, she said. Paris, women do whatever they want to. Not here. She said, I'm discreet. He looked to the waiter who nodded to them. She said, I know him too. So he took one of the cigarettes and she lit it for him. An intimacy, not like a cigar, she said. You inhale the smoke. I know about it, he said to her, like opium. Easier, she said. Nonetheless, it made him dizzy. Through the smoke, she looked him in the eyes. He'd been with women. He wouldn't say plenty. If you're attracted to women, to anything, then you never have enough of it. And women went beyond anything. Your desire for them was beyond instinct. It was biblical, deeper than Moses or Noah. But when lucky, he always had a number of acquaintances, some on hot nights or cold nights or nights too dark to breathe inside. Someone who was soft enough, who could share a story or a drink, but he couldn't recall staring into a beautiful woman's eyes through smoke, through mystery. That's what he felt now, a dance with the unconquerable, if not the unknown, because he'd never been in love. At least in this moment, that's how he felt, that he'd never known love before. And suddenly, in an instant, that all had been breached, like touching the moon, the goddess that in every culture known to man. I know that I say use man, but you see, it's men, talking about men here. Her eyes behind the smoke, like the moon in the mist. Now he didn't know whether to lean forward or lean back. Never before had he known an indecisive moment in front of a woman. What do you like? Would you like to walk along the river, he said. She put out her cigarette with the tip of her shoe. Certainly, she said. The river was broad and green. People, couples like them, lingered arm in arm. It was spring, of course, the air sweet, the breeze still cool. It pushed her hair across her face. Delicately, she pushed it behind her ear and turned to him. They kiss. I don't live far from here, she said to him. But yet too far, I hope, he said softly. She stepped back, but he still held her hand. Let's say we meet again in a week, he said to her. She took another step back and released his hand. Then let's say we do, she said, and turned and walked away. Word in the street said a Yankee fleet was in the Gulf. They'd have to come up the river to get to New Orleans and sail between two cement and stone forts, Fort Jackson and St. Philip. A fusillade from both sides of the river and stationary torpedoes had been planted underwater in between. From there, it was another 40 miles to the city. but the South had boats too, and an army on the shorelines, both the east and the west banks. The city wasn't very worried. Up till then, the Union hadn't shown it could win a battle. But as you know, they come to New Orleans. Rick had other things to think about. A wagon of rye to move to taverns, French wine to distribute to plantations between New Orleans and Jackson, Mississippi, and Anna Breton, whose visage came to him in an idle moment, in any idle moment, her eyes dancing behind gorgeous smoke, her voice sliding like silk. They hadn't said where they would meet, but there were only 3 possible places: the bookstore, the cafe, or the river. Where he started, tracing his steps backwards, not seeing her, he watched the barges on the river, the paddle steamboat. Late morning, approaching noon, New Orleans people were already drinking. He chided himself for not knowing the exact time, a week ago when they met. He walked away from the river into Suitcase. On the street, horses and donkeys pulled wagons of sundry that clattered on the cobblestone. As he approached the cafe, he almost hoped she wouldn't show, relieving him of this obsession. He wouldn't turn it into a haunt. He'd simply walk away from a fond memory, maybe find a bar and a real prostitute. He didn't see her there at the cafe, but neither did he expect her to find her sitting alone. He found her in the stacks, glancing at a novel by Balzac. She looked up, her brow slightly furrowed, then lifted, those eyes paler than the sky. I knew him, she said. Knew him, he said. Paris had a lot of parties. She closed the book. Can we go to my place now? He didn't say, he said, I didn't like La Tentation de Saint Antoine either. The Temptation of Saint Antoine, this first novel. Too experimental for you as well, but I hear the next one will be more realistic, more autobiographical. You heard that, said Rick. This isn't a professional transaction, Anna Breton said. I want to sleep with you. Let's take a carriage, he said. I want to know how you feel next to me. She said, I'd like that very much. It was March, fine weather for an open ride along the river. She moved under his arm, kissed his cheek, and rubbed her soft hair under his nose. She was delicate and soft and aromatic. Rick directed them through the quarter to St. Louis Cemetery, where they disembarked and walked silently among the graves. She took his hand, then his arm. They stopped in front of a family mausoleum where she turned to him. The water table is so close here, he whispered, that when the river rises, you can hear the caskets float up to knock against the casements. That would be lovely at night, she said. This time, they kissed more passionately. Are we falling in love, said Rick. It's better if you're in love, she said. And it was, even if a little awkward at first, though the second time his passion was so ardent, he gripped himself on the edge of violence, and it felt that she did too. I like that, she said to him. She got up and put on his shirt, taking possession of him as if she wore his soul. She poured out 2 glasses of port, lit 2 cigarettes, and gave one to him in bed, as in France, she said. The smoke was relaxing and romantic, curling in the air as if reiterating the act of lovemaking in the space above them. So, said Rick, I suppose you knew Flaubert as well. I slept with him. Coitus interruptus. Why am I not surprised? He could be surprising. Isn't he fat and bald and short, but extremely smart? And I'm handsome and sexy. You don't write poetry, do you? I do not, mon cher. I am poetry. And your husband, he said, I was faithful, so to speak. In Paris, it isn't the same. As here, as anywhere else. She came to him again. Then they dressed, went into the streets, ate crepes and drank Burgundy at a restaurant nearby. He guessed she'd been in love a dozen times or more, or never been in love, not even now. As she sat across from him, exuding love, which made his attraction all the more intense. So he guessed as well that she knew that. They parted there, agreeing to meet in a week again, not specifying when or where that would be, that becoming part of it, her incessant seduction, that he searched for her amidst the flea markets and shops and taverns and bookstores. Okay. Each time feeling almost as the first when they'd find a hotel and then make love. They ferried on the Mississippi or on Lake Pontchartrain, took carriage rides, or went horseback riding across the river in Pecan Grove or a park in St. Charles. She liked the cemeteries too. In St. Louis again, as they left, the skies opened up and the rain fell in sheets. They ran to a small cafe where others, like themselves, took respite and laughed joyously at the downpour. She ordered coffee and a pastry filled with yellow cream. He drank red wine. The rain is miraculous and lovely, she said. Let's go back to the cemetery and listen for the coffins. And they did. They found a spot away from the family mausoleums where the ground dipped and singular graves sat like flat boats in the mud. The sky was wet, low, and dark, and the city was quiet. The street activity yet to resume. Then the first of the graves knocked, then another, as the dead rocked in their sleep, answering each other with knocks and rumbles. She took his lapels in her hands and brought herself to him, her face in his chest as they listened to the chorus of the dead. Shortly, it lessened and knocking faded as the dead went back to sleep. Graves made him think about the future, or the end of the future, the only certain future, death, of course. Then, in the next quiet moment, they heard the first pounding of cannon. This is some moment, he said. Maybe appropriately, our last moment. That's pretty poetic, or fatalistic, he said. Love, destruction, beauty, death. It's been said many times, but most recently, she whispered, Baudelaire. He didn't want to know who said it. And seeing that, she said, he was not that kind of man. Are we thinking at all about the future, he said. The Yankees are in the river, she said. That's the future. If they take the city, I'll be arrested. For no reason? They won't need a reason. They'll presume I'm a spy. You are a spy, of course. Maybe I am. It won't matter. If the fighting comes here, even the Confederacy holds the city. There'll be soldiers everywhere. What will you do? When, if ever, she said, has what I wanted had anything to do with what happened? He said, maybe this time it will be different. Isn't this different? How different, she said. He said, marry me. But he'd been prepared for this moment in other ways during this romance. He'd set up his accounts for liquidation and could be ready to evacuate in 2 days. He traveled with Shope. He told her this. There have been free blacks here since the beginning, she said. No one's going to care how free anybody thinks they are. I'll get you a train ticket. You can follow us up. Pack up. Do you need help? I do not. I love you, Anna Breton, Rick said. Thank you very much. I had a good time reading to you. Who's where?
Karen, I think you're muted, actually.
Oh, here I am. I've just been chattering away. Anyhow, that was wonderful, Chuck. That was it was even better than reading it. You really read it well. And now I love readings that are abundance of riches, and this is one of them, because Amy's poetry is something that's going to delight you. It's wonderful. Amy has been an important voice in Asian American poetry for 30 years. She is sansei, third generation Japanese American. Her new book, That Blue Trickster Time, is her 6th collection of poetry. She's a winner of the Nicholas Roerich Poetry Prize and co-edited the widely used anthology Roots, an Asian American Reader. I can do no better than cite a recent review in Rhino Journal that comments on the seriousness and depth that distinguishes her new work. While noting her focus on women's issues, it adds that she gives evidence of knowing more than a little about historical female oppression. Poems in this book address contemporary discrimination, but they also are stunningly located in the historical persecution of the Japanese. After reading her poem, 36 Views of Manzanar, it's appalling to recognize that the Los Angeles landmark Descanso Gardens have their genesis in the, quote, over 300,000 camellias acquired from the forced sale of her grandfather's nursery when the family was forcibly relocated to Manzanar detention camp at the beginning of World War II. A lifelong activist, now writing from the standpoint of maturity, her poems display mastery of an aesthetically restrained lyric voice. They beautifully celebrate people and movements, and importantly, the sheer pleasure of making verbal connection that has made possible her life as woman and poet. So thank you, Amy. I look forward to hearing you read this lovely work.
Thanks, Karen. I'd like to thank What Books Press for publishing this new book, and also Beyond Baroque for having Chuck, Karen, and me here tonight. And thanks to all of you listening in tonight. I can't see you, but I hope, well, I know a lot of my friends are watching right now, so hello. From Karen's description, I mean, there's a lot of serious stuff in my new book, but I'm going to try to balance it out more with some lighter material too. This first poem was written not about Descanso Gardens, but Huntington Gardens. And it was written before the pandemic lockdown. But I think it applies even more now than when I wrote it. This need for us to find solace in nature and the comfort of being surrounded by flowers and trees. And I call this Chinese snowballs at Huntington Gardens. For a few hours, our minds are happy captives of plants and trees in full April bloom. Recent rains returning a truer green to our LA landscape. Even the cacti grateful for the plentiful showers which broke years of drought. We forget the danger that fills our nightly news, the warnings from journalists, that feeling of being bombarded from every direction with no escape. Yet we do, set free in these gardens, seeded from every continent. Who would guess there are so many types of aloe, both local and as far away as Madagascar and Brazil? The Japanese maples are peaking in bright red and crimson, while Chinese snowball trees burst with festive white pom-poms. So much beauty, enough for all who pay attention, whether hummingbird or freeway driver, honeybee, lizard, or goose. The world raging outside, impossible to bring into this conversation. So Karen talked about my being older. And so this next poem is about older women. And I don't know how many of you do Zumba, but there's a term called Zumba Gold, which is a special name given to Zumba designed for seniors. It's less strenuous. And I got into Zumba about 5 years ago and just totally got crazy about it. Was doing it at least 3 times a week. This is from a longer prose poem. I'm going to read an excerpt. Zumba Gold at 9 a.m. We were a throng of older women. Yes, we are silver and white-haired, or in my case, color-enhanced reddish brown. Some with new knees and hips, others sporting flashy neon wristbands to tally how many steps. All of us ready to rumble in our rubber-soled shoes. Most of us are having the best time we've had in decades, feel like we did in our teens, maybe better, since we don't care if we look uncool. Heck, no pressure anymore from ogling adolescents or lascivious men. Now nothing matters more than the way this Latin music pulls us in. Our bodies set loose to congas and timbales. We learn salsa, very New York City smooth, or Dominican merengue is frenzied and almost too fast to keep on beat. We all like the song where we gyrate our hips, follow our teacher Yvonne in an unhurried blend of hula and belly dance, then raise arms and hands to shoo away something toward the sky. All of us joining the chorus, amor, 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 amor. Not sure if we're sending love out to the universe or saying goodbye to a lover. But my favorite is cha-cha, which we got from Cuba. I didn't know this in the 60s when I cha-cha-cha'd to Chicano and Motown discs, doing it East Side style with a swivel and dip. Cha-cha feels like I'm coming home, so easy and free, just a Zumba crazed grandma with bad knees. That's me. So, Zumba. This next piece, I belong to a group of 4 women poets for over 20 years. And we often meet over noodles. So we started calling ourselves the Noodlettes. You could say the next poem is an ode to Ramen Noodles, as well as a nod to my sister poets. This is called How to Become a Better Noodle Poet. Choose your noodle carefully. Let's focus today on ramen. Other days we might groove to curry laksa or saimin, to guksu, bean threads or pho. For our noodle of choice, immerse it in a delectable brew. Fish-based, pork-soaked, or clear veggie broths. Garnish with handfuls of finely chopped scallions. Build layers of tastiness from surface to secret interiors. Add your own particulars, pink fish cake, garden greens, a perfectly poached egg yolk. A memorable bowl of steaming noodles can tantalize all 5 senses, including the ears, as we listen to our boisterous slurping. Know that no 2 noodleistas compose the same song. Know your noodle is better than mine in this poet's kitchen. Learn to make every bite float on the tongue, then dive. For all of you that like noodles, they've become very popular. And I notice on the cooking shows, all those chefs know how to cook ramen. So Karen mentioned Manzanar and what happened to Japanese Americans. In 1942, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. And when he signed that, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were sent to concentration camps, including my mother and father's families. My father's family, the Uyematsus, were assigned to Manzanar. And this is a true story my dad told me about my grandfather. And this is the same grandfather Karen referred to, who grew camellias. The Suitcase. In 1945, Dad and Grandpa get a travel permit from Manzanar officials to visit Star Nurseries, the business Grandpa starts back in the 30s and flourishes even in the Depression years. They take a bus bound for LA. Stopping in the small town of Mojave, Dad tells Grandpa to stay on the bus, knowing the war is still being fought and how dangerous it is for them. But Grandpa gets off anyway. Like many Issei, Grandpa is short, 5'2" at the most, not exactly threatening. But as he walks downtown, the cops arrest him, put Grandpa and Dad in jail to spend the night. Around 2 a.m., FBI agents pick them up and drive them to Fresno, never suspecting the hatchet Grandpa packs in his suitcase. The hatchet, not so unusual for this gifted plank blower. Dad recalls how dark it is on the winding mountain roads. Already nervous, he starts to panic when one of the agents turns on the light inside the car, looks hard at both of them sitting in the back seat. Dad warns Grandpa, speaking in Japanese, Don't do anything to make them suspicious. The FBI never inspects the suitcase. Once in Fresno, they are questioned, then put back on a bus to LA. Grandpa's hatchet in tow. I can't imagine what would have happened if they'd opened that suitcase and found the hatchet. Now, Asian American history is one where we go through cycles where we're the target. So of course, in World War II, Japanese Americans were the target. And now, during this pandemic, Asian Americans have become the target again. According to Asian American Pacific Islander Equity Alliance, there were over 10,000 hate incidents between March 2020 and September 2021. These included everything from verbal harassment to property damage and physical assaults. These Asian hate crimes are still continuing now in 2022. I wrote this piece early in April of 2020, never expecting the number of hate crimes that have occurred since. I call this pandemic postscript, or are we too visible again? This season, Asian Americans are the targets. The president pointing his finger at China, but no difference if we're Chinese or Korean, Japanese, Filipino, Vietnamese, Hmong. Because in a country ingrained in white privilege, slavery, genocide, we get the dubious and ever-changing honor of being invisible, a model minority, or yellow peril scapegoats. It's your fault. Go back to China. Calling COVID-19 the Kung flu is enough to incite the mob. We are warning each other to take extra precautions when riding the subway or going to the market. Don't be surprised if a non-Asian curses, pushes you, spits in your face. One woman taking her trash out is doused and burned with acid. Actor John Cho reminds us we belong here conditionally. The masks worn for this pandemic, not nearly enough to protect us. I'm not sure how many poets were math majors in college, but I majored in math at UCLA and ended up being a high school math teacher for LA Unified for 32 years. So every now and then I write math poems. I really get intrigued with numbers and number patterns, like the recent palindrome date, February 2nd, 2022, which we write as 2-2-22, reading it the same forwards and backwards. In 2016, I stumbled upon the number 108 when I went to an Indian casino and kept seeing it. This is called It Isn't Coincidence. Am I the only one who sees the number 108 everywhere these days? At the tribal casino, a penny slot machine with Chinese dragons where I can bet 108 cents. Or last month's World Series, where it took the Chicago Cubs 108 years to win again. Like any good researcher, I've Googled to learn it's not only auspicious, but divine in many religions. Buddhists and Taoists hold malas with 108 prayer beads. Hindus have 108 deities, even 108 energy lines uniting to form the heart chakra. In astronomy, the sun's diameter is about 108 times the Earth's. And in nature, math, and art, it's used in the formula for the golden ratio. So pleasing, whether in Da Vinci's Mona Lisa or spiraling seashells and pine cones. My husband thinks I'm too superstitious, but I was born on the 18th. 18 times 6 equals 108. And my 90-year-old mother, who's one of the luckiest women I know, just moved into a retirement home. Her apartment unit, a perfect number, 108. So, that's all true, 108. This next piece was written about 3 years into the Trump presidency. I wrote a lot when Trump was president. On a hot July afternoon, I was in my backyard and I think I saw a falcon, which would be unusual. Later that day, a bird crashed into our window. This poem was my reaction. Unrelenting this heat, unforgiving this July. I want to write about clouds and stones. The pleasure they give me usually takes over, but not this time. My country of birth, the only country I know, the country I protested, where I witnessed true change, is this country I no longer know. The latest lie or despicable act, all we can talk about, the idea of we distorted to your side or mine. And yet, I am sure we remain connected. We are clouds and stones and mothers and birds. Though I just saw a falcon in my garden, a tiny songbird in its dangerous beak, the victim about to be eaten. So easy to leap now. This dread of things falling apart, almost like watching ourselves being eaten alive. Though we are still here, uncertain onlookers to an unending litany, unthinkable crimes becoming ordinary truths in this unfamiliar country where we are the divided and the conquered. I hear more commotion in my backyard trees, birds crying out, even crashing the living room window, afraid the falcon will strike again. There's a screaming inside I can't soften or silence. I can't convince anyone. We are all connected. We are clouds and stones and worlds at war. No matter how broken, always connected. No matter how deadly, we are mothers and birds, so closely connected we are. How am I for time? Fine? Okay. George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis in May of 2020 sparked the largest racial justice protest in the US since the Civil Rights Movement. This poem was written 2 years earlier when the film Black Panther came out. The Panthers. President's Day weekend 2018. Black Panther, the new Marvel comic film, breaking records for ticket sales. Many young fans, too young to know about the Black Panthers of my generation. It's the same feeling of ethnic pride as 50 years ago, when Oakland Black Panthers served free breakfast to children. 268 Olympics medal winners gave the Black Power salute, and we sang with James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud, even if we weren't Black. Revolutionary change, the new normal then, let it remain the new normal now. With Black Lives Matter, NFL players on bended knee, women's marches from coast to coast, high school students demanding anti-gun laws. 50 years ago, when Martin was killed, who could imagine we'd elect Barack Obama just 4 decades later? Hip hop music and dance would be global staples. Claudine Rankine's Citizens, the only poetry bestseller. Superheroes are nothing new in the struggle. Only this time a Disney movie is giving every boy and girl, young and old, that big screen sensation of fighting for justice, as normal as Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, on and on. Let us bridge the generations and remind all who will listen that it only takes one woman sitting on a bus to inspire hundreds, one farm worker, one union activist, one parent to build a movement based on the power of the people. So I'm going to close with the last poem in my new book. It's a 7-part poem, but I'm going to be reading just the first and the last section. It includes the word obon. Obon is a tradition which Japanese immigrants brought from Japan and still celebrate over a century later here. Obon is an annual Buddhist festival to honor one's ancestors. If you've been to Obons here in LA, you've seen the large circle of dancers. Many of us who join the dancing don't know the steps, but everyone is still encouraged to dance, no matter how foolish we may look. It took me a long time to finally join in the Obon. I think I was in my 60s, but I finally did it, and I'm really glad I started dancing. This poem is called In What Season Love, In What Season Dying. Section 1, Summer Obon. Long after dream, a memory of rice fields, this August moon, whose wordless aching, ancestral spirits, flickering lights on these crowded streets, taiko drumbeats, dancers who beckon. I'm old now too. Join the circle of fools, long into night. And section 7, Still Spring. On poppy-domed hills, after the rains, pilgrims' eyes brimming, armfuls of laughter, well past dark, chatter of sparrows and kids, whose small-throated sighs, a lover's quarrel, that blue trickster time, how much more, our wide shining eyes, is this the last kiss? Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, so much. That was absolutely
Thanks,
lovely.
Amy. It was really good, wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chip, for your reading. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Amy, and thanks, Karen, for hosting. I just really wonderful readings. We appreciate it so very much. And so I just also want to say thank you to the entire audience for being here as well. Wonderful to have you here virtually. Hope to see many of you, all of you in person soon, but we'll also be, continuing to hold this virtual space also. So I think that's about it, unless, any last words from Amy, Chuck, Karen, anything you guys want to add? No, I think that's about it. All right.
Oh, I have to think, support Beyond Baroque.
Yes, thank you, Amy. We appreciate that.
Those are good words.
We always appreciate the support. So thank you for that. Maybe Yvonne can throw something in the chat really quick. Yes, there it is in the chat. So I think that's about it for the evening. Thanks, everyone, and see you all soon. Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.